So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make a petri dish for growing mushroom mycelium. In the petri dish, you can either grow spores and it will grow into mycelium, or you can use these also to clone pretty much any mushroom by taking a tissue sample from the mushroom and putting it on the agar dish. So this is what's known as a nutritive agar media, and the main ingredients that we're going to use is agar powder. It's like a vegan gelatin substitute, and that's basically the gel that's in a petri dish. And we're also going to need light corn syrup and potato flakes for this specific recipe. There's all kinds of different recipes. This is this one that I've been using that I found works really well. And this is the main recipe for, this makes about 6 of these cups filled, not filled. We're pouring them very thin because basically the mycelium grows two-dimensionally. It doesn't grow deep into the petri dish, it just grows on top of it, so there's no point in pouring them thick. So to make 6 of these cups, you're going to need 3 grams of these just regular instant mashed potato flakes, and that's what's in this bag. 2 grams of agar, 1 gram of corn syrup. This is just the white corn syrup. I think the container that I had it in cracked, so I just transferred it into a jar. And then a half a cup of water, which we're going to heat up on the stove. And then I'm going to pour it into this dish. You're going to want to put it in something kind of like this that has a narrow opening. This is just something that I actually found in the woods while I was mushroom hunting. It went into an old dump and had probably been there since the 1960s or so. So to do that, you're going to also need a scale like this one that will measure to the nearest 100th of a gram, because you want these measurements to be as exact as you can get them. And then for pouring, well, first you're also going to need a pressure cooker, because we do have to sterilize this in the pressure cooker for, this book says 45 minutes. I've only ever done 20 minutes. So after we get everything heated up, pour it into this dish, then we'll pressure cook it for 20 minutes, and then we have to let it cool to 135 degrees. So you'll also need a thermometer that can measure temperature. Like this one. I use this so we can check the temperature of it. And we want it to be down to 135 degrees before we pour it. And we're going to be pouring it into the cups inside of our still air box. So hopefully you've already got your still air box done. I put these little pieces of plastic over the front just for a little added protection. Make sure your whole entire workspace is clean. While I've got my stuff in the pressure cooker, I'm going to be cleaning everything using 70% isopropyl alcohol. Don't try to be cute and think you're being extra clean by using something like 90% rubbing alcohol, because that evaporates too quickly and it doesn't clean as well as 70%. So anytime you're doing any cleaning for your mushroom cultivation processes, always use 70% isopropyl rubbing alcohol. And of course you'll need paper towels as well. So I'm going to get my ingredients mixed together and on the stove. Be right back. So I got my cup on the scale, got it zeroed out. Start adding some potato flakes until I get to 3 grams. So I start with the solids. It's easy to go over, take a little bit out. I want to get it exactly 3. And actually I added a full cup of water in my pan, so I'm doing a double batch. I'm going to go ahead and make 12 of these, so I'm going to get 6 grams. Six grams potato flakes. Then I need 4 grams agar. So since I got my 6, I'm going to tear this out, zero it, and then add my 4 grams agar, 4 grams agar, Then for a double batch, I need 2 grams of light corn syrup. I like to use this little syringe here, works pretty well. Heat up the water, get your water till it's just very lightly boiling, and then we'll add all the ingredients in. I forgot to mention that I like to add a little bit of food coloring to my agar. It helps to make it a little bit easier to identify contamination that might be growing in there if you give it a little blue color. So I'm just going to put a few drops in there first before I add everything else. Okay, so just before the water starts to boil, it's good and hot. Dump all of our ingredients in there. Do a little stir. We don't really want it to come to a full boil. We want to get all the potato flakes dissolved and everything mixed together really well. I'm not going to leave it on the heat for very long at all. Don't think I even wrote down what the time is. But we do not want to overcook it. So don't let it get to a rolling boil. I'm just lifting it up off the heat right now because it's as low as this burner will go. Turn it off. Once it's all in our container, I'm going to cover that with foil. Mix it together again, pick up some of that blue color. I didn't get nearly enough blue in there. I'm going to add more blue. A little more. Blue enough for me. I'm pretty colorblind. Aluminum foil. Just like that. Pressure cooker with just a little bit of water in there. I have it just over, I mean, it's barely even touching the bottom of the bottle. And then I'll put the lid on that and I'll pressure cook this for 20 minutes at 15 psi. So the timer does not start until it gets up to 15 psi. So while I'm waiting on the pressure cooker, I'm going to clean everything. I'm going to clean my still air box inside and out, the surface that it's sitting on, turning off my ceiling fan, turning off all fans, closing all the windows, try to limit the amount of air moving in here because we do not want any sort of contamination to get into our cups as we pour them. See how I have these cups stored, zipped up tight and double bagged. A lot of people use regular Petri dishes for this. That would be just like a regular Petri dish that you have to buy. These are much cheaper and I think they work just as well. It's just like a condiment cup that I think I ordered these off of Amazon. These are 2.5 ounce cups and these work great. I don't have to do any additional sterilization to these. They're clean enough just as they come in the package. So this is what I use. And then I don't have to mess with any tape or anything like that. When you use Petri dishes, you have to put tape around the outside of them to actually seal them up. Otherwise, these lids just sit on there. They don't snap on. Something else you're going to want that I didn't mention is rubber gloves. Regular rubber gloves would probably work just fine as long as you clean them with your isopropyl rubbing alcohol. Always wash your hands really well before you put them on. Always a good idea to even take a shower before you start this work to have everything just as clean as possible, because you really can't be too clean. And a mask like this one. And what I'm going to do now, while I'm still waiting on this pressure cooker to be done sterilizing, I'm going to go ahead and get my 12 cups set inside my still air box so all the air can settle in there and I don't have any additional air moving around in there. So I got my 12 cups and 12 lids inside the still air box. And just for a brief overview of what we can do with these petri dishes of mushroom mycelium, you see this one, shiitake. There's a couple of different ways that we can start out with making our mushroom grain spawn, which this is an example of grain spawn in its pretty early stages. This one happens to be wine cap, and inside this jar are hydrated and sterilized whole oats, just inside of a regular jar. And this one was actually inoculated with wine cap mycelium in the form of a liquid culture. You can buy liquid cultures from places like the myceliumemporium.com, which is where I got this one from. And basically what I did on this is I put a self-healing injection port in here by drilling just a 16th inch hole in the top of this lid. And then I filled it with a heat resistant caulk. So then all I have to do then is put the needle on the syringe and inject it through here. And I just put just a few drops really of this liquid culture inside of there. And then it starts to grow on the grains like this, and that's what the mycelium looks like in its early stages. This one's actually just growing very slowly because these two, the wine cap and the pearl oysters, were both inoculated on the same date. So this one's just growing much faster. And so it's colonizing those oats. When this whole thing is white, then we would call it fully colonized. Some people like to shake these up, and they say it helps them to colonize faster. And they say normally you would do that after it's about 20% grown. So when it's about 20% of this is white, and then you do it again, shake it, break it up, mix it all together after it's 80% fully colonized, and that helps it to colonize faster. I'm just letting this one go. I haven't shaken this one at all just to see what happens, to see if it actually makes a difference. And what you can do with this is you can actually expand this up to 100 times and make about 100 times more grain spawn out of this, which is kind of what I have here. This is the same thing, just in a bag. This is an autoclavable bag, so it's a bag that you can actually put inside of the pressure cooker. So what I could do is, after this is fully colonized, shake this up, which you do by beating it on a rubber tire is the best way to do it, to get it to break up, because the mycelium makes it hold together really well. I could, inside of my still air box, open up this jar after it's all shaken up and pour a little bit of it into my sterilized grains after they've cooled, which I'll go through that whole process in another video of how to hydrate and sterilize these. And once they're cooled to room temperature, then I could add a little bit of that into there, and that would just make more of the grain spawn so that we can do more grow bags like this one. So this would be taking fully colonized grains into a sterilized substrate bag, which is what this is. This is a mixture of sawdust and wheat bran, I believe. I think that's all that's in this one. And these are chestnut mushrooms that I'm not so sure are going to grow. I think something went wrong with this one. It might be contaminated. And if you don't use the liquid culture syringe to inoculate these, you'll use what we're doing right now, which is making our agar dishes. You can use a scalpel like this one to cut a few wedges or a few slices out of that, and then you just drop them in the jar and close it back up. So that's another way to inoculate your sterilized grains with mycelium. You either use the liquid culture or you use this, the fully colonized petri dish. Another thing that I should point out is the reason that we're making so many of these petri dishes is that it's highly unlikely that you're going to clone a mushroom and get a perfectly clean plate like this one on your first try. You might make, you might want to try doing 6 or so to start off with, and do 6 different petri dishes with clones on them. And then basically what will probably happen is you'll have a few of them that'll grow some white mycelium in them. Some of them will grow contaminants. And what you can do is, if you have a section of healthy mycelium, you can transfer that mycelium with your scalpel, cut out a small piece of the healthy mycelium, and then transfer it onto another clean plate that hasn't been even opened yet or doesn't have anything else growing on it. That's actually what this one is here. I actually bought some shiitake mushrooms from the grocery store and cloned it on Agar, and this is a transfer off of that. So that's exactly what happened. Was I had some healthy mycelium that grew on that original clone petri dish, and I took some of that mycelium and set it right in the middle of this plate, and then that grew from this to make a fully colonized plate of shiitake mycelium. So when you do your transfers, it's best to use young mushrooms. Here I'm using oysters for an example, although I'm not actually doing a cloning of this one right now. But what you're going to do is you're going to tear, I can hold my phone here, get the camera up like this. You'll tear the mushroom like this, so that this section, you do this inside the still air box, so you can get a tiny little piece of this from the inside that hasn't been exposed to air for very long at all, if at all. And you'll get just a little sliver of that out of there, and you'll gently place that on your agar dish. Even that right there on agar is enough to clone that mushroom. And that would be a good spot to take it from, is right there, right after I tore it. Set that on your plate, close the lid as quickly as possible, and just wait and see what happens. It's actually best you would flame sterilize your scalpel, and then to cool it, you actually stick it in the agar. So just stick it in there, give it a second to cool down, and then you would do your transfer and take that little piece of the mushroom and actually stick that right in the same hole that you used to cool your scalpel with, so that it's completely surrounded by the nutritive agar to give it the best chance for survival and the best chance for that to take over any sort of contaminants that get in it. And that is how you clone a mushroom. Earlier, I also mentioned that you can grow mushrooms from putting spores on your nutritive agar media. I used to think that it took multiple spores coming together to form mycelium, but I later learned that that is not the case, and that mushrooms or spores are a lot like seeds, but the difference is that seeds actually have all of the nutrients that they need in order to sprout within the seed. You just have to add water to get it to sprout. That's actually all it takes. But for spores, it gets all of its nutrition from its environment. So it has to basically land on something that is nutritious enough for it to feed off of, like this agar plate. For the most part, people don't really grow gourmet mushrooms from spores because it is not nearly as effective or efficient. When you clone a mushroom, you get all of the same exact phenotype from the mushroom cloned within that particular clone, so it keeps not only the same mushroom but the same phenotype. Timer's going off, so I'm going to turn my heat off and let that gradually lose pressure on its own. Alexa, stop the timer. So, although you can grow mushrooms from the spores, the only time that you would do that basically is if you were growing illegal mushrooms. I think that's really the only reason that people grow mushrooms from spores. For the most part, it's very easy to get live cultures of gourmet mushrooms in a syringe, or you can just get the mushrooms yourself and clone them if you want to grow them. Just going to see what the temperature is now. Have to put this on home use, not on people use, otherwise it just says you're about dead. 196. So we're gonna wait until that's at 135 and then we can start pouring. Side note, you could also use jars like this as your like petri dishes, and you could pour them and then pressure cook them and then just let them cool. So then you wouldn't have any need for a still air box in this case, not until you wouldn't need it for this process anyways, because you would just pressure cook it in here and then it would be sterilized and you just leave it closed until you're ready to put, ready to inoculate it. Something else to keep in mind as we're pouring our agar cups is if you don't put, basically what we're going to do is we're going to pour them and we're going to leave them in stacks so they'll be stacked up, because you want something hot on top of each one of the cups. Otherwise you get condensation on the lid, and that's never good. You don't want condensation on the lid because it could carry contamination, and it also inhibits your ability to actually see through the lid to see how it's growing. So what I'm doing is I'm heating up some water over here too. I'm going to fill up a couple of dishes with hot water to set on top of the very top cup so that none of our cups have condensation on the lid. If we didn't do this, then basically all of the stack would be fine except for the top one. But by putting this up top, that prevents prevents condensation on all of them. Some people don't like this agar mix because it's not clear. I guess that really bothers some mycologists, but I don't see the difference. And then I'll just leave them just like that overnight. I'll put the still air box over them just in case. Try to keep them clean best we can.